Hi, I'm Rick. I was born and raised here in Cold Lake, and this is my father's story.
Hi, I'm Amanda, born and raised in Meadow Lake, and this is my grandparents' story. Both my grandparents were involved with World War II, both my grandfathers. My grandpa Jones served with an anti-tank regiment for the Canadian Armed Forces. I have only one story, that he was injured and sent home after a motorcycle accident delivering messages between Northern Holland and Germany at night with no lights. My mother's parents, Grandma and Grandpa Brouwer, were Dutch children when World War II began. I did not know my Grandpa Brouwer as he died before I was born. Today, my story is about my Dutch-Canadian grandparents.
My dad, Grant Hetherington, was a prairie farm boy living near Vermilion, Alberta when the Second World War started. The call to defend Britain was heard in Canada, and 1.1 million Canadians, just like my dad, would answer the call. Dad was only a 15-year-old boy when the war started. He had to wait 3 long years to enlist. He visited the recruiting office in Vermilion and joined the RAF in May of 1942.
Grandma was a child in Rotterdam during World War II. She heard mortar bombs being dropped, and their doorbell was ringing all the time from the vibrations. When her family had to leave their home, they walked and walked to the edge of the city. When they looked back, the sky was full of smoke and there was fire everywhere. All that was left of their home and belongings was rubble. They stayed with a family they didn't even know until they heard there might be a place in Oversley, a neighboring town, which is where my grandparents eventually met. Today, Oversley is a suburb of Rotterdam.
Dad talked very little about his service until late in his life. The scars were deep, and like so many that set down themselves in service of their country, he paid the price for his whole life. He was one of the lucky ones that came home, though. Dad was the oldest boy in his family, and he talked of his widowed mother breaking down in tears when he told her that he enlisted. She cried, "You'll be killed." He also had a beautiful girlfriend that he would leave behind with a promise of marriage upon his return. Noreen Sarah Williams, my mom, waited for his return, and they were married on December 7th, 1945. Dad started his training in Calgary at No. 2 Wireless School and then on to Lethbridge to No. 8 Gunnery School. Dad had spent countless hours in his youth at the train station where his father picked up and delivered freight for his delivery business. It was there that as a boy he learned Morse code, so it was natural to become a wireless operator. Dad flew several operational missions over Germany, with the targets being mostly military installations or factories that supported the Nazi war effort. There were, however, missions that targeted military barracks and support towns, and these are the things that were hard to reconcile for the boy from Vermilion.
In 1944, the Germans forced all Dutch men between 17 and 40 years of age into their army. My grandpa was sent to Germany as a baker, cook, stationed beside a weapons factory which was frequently bombed. In 1945, I've been told, was the hunger winter in the Netherlands. My grandma mentioned an 8 p.m. curfew, having to black out their windows, electricity for only a few hours a day, no heat. To quote my grandma, rations were too small to live on, too much to die on. They sometimes ate tulip bulbs, and even her cat, because if they didn't, someone else would have. Occasionally, there was green bread made of pea meal, and a good chance it was moldy. My own Pete told me that Grandpa had pet rabbits, and when he was sent to Germany, his parents kept those rabbits alive for him. I guess Grandpa was very upset because his family didn't eat the rabbits when he realized just how hard the hunger winter was.
Dad did speak of the MANA missions that he participated in between April 29th and May 7th, 1945. The Netherlands was in the grips of a famine. Allied forces struck a deal with the German operational leaders on the ground. If the German soldiers would allow the bombers to drop food to the starving people, they would grant them POW status as opposed to facing the war crimes charges. This deal would allow the Allies to fly at as little as 50 feet off the ground and make drops of life-saving manna. Dad and his crew flew 6 sorties, 3 dropping food supplies near The Hague, and 3 to the people of Rotterdam. Dad talked about being able to see the faces of the people running to collect food, including German soldiers who laid down their arms. The people of the Netherlands, overwhelmed by the support, made signs in the field such as "Thank you, boys," and "Thanks, Canucks, send cigs."
To help meet the desperate needs of the Dutch, starving in isolated cities, food supplies from the United Nations are rushed to Holland by air. At an airfield in England, food is being loaded into Allied bombers that only the week before were battering Germany into submission. Over the desolate, flooded fields of Holland, once before the Germans touched them, among the most fertile in Europe, over the broken bridges, the broken towns, across a land ravaged by the German retreat, fly the bombers. Pilot flares mark the target areas, and the Mercy cargo descends. In 3 days, over 800 tons of food for a stricken people.
Grandma wrote this down. Then came May 4th, 1945. We heard rumors the war was over. Could we really believe it after 5 long years, especially the hard last months? It seemed true. Everyone went down to the main street, wall to wall, people crying, "The Canadians are coming." Soon we saw Canadian tanks. Unbelievable. It was true. May 5th, 1945 was the liberation of the Netherlands. She continued, "What a relief. The end of the war was like a sudden arrival of spring after a long cold winter. Soon after we were liberated, the food drops must have started. Orange Canadian cheese in tins. I think flour was given to the bakers to make bread. It tasted like cake after the rations of the hunger winter. It was so neat not to have a curfew anymore, not needing to blacken our windows, but to get back to a normal life, a more normal life. It's all very hard to explain. I believe the word relief that the war was over describes it in a very small way." She also mentioned it was still an up and down time, as Grandpa did not arrive back from Germany until the end of June. And what a wonderful day that was. They both had so many stories to tell each other.
My dad's final operational mission was a trip to Brussels as part of Operation Exodus. His logbook notes that they transported 24 British POWs back to London on that flight. I can't imagine the sense of relief for those men and the reflective moments of the ones they had left behind. My dad loved to hear stories of how the MANA missions changed and saved lives. He would have loved Amanda's story. We had the opportunity several years ago during Operation Maple Flag to introduce Dad to 2 fine young airmen from the Dutch Air Force. As it turns out, one of the young pilots' grandfather was from Rotterdam, and he told him and had told him about the life-saving MANA that they had received. Reading Dad's logbook entries brought a swell of emotion to both of the men, young and old.
My story doesn't end with the end of World War II. My grandparents had their civil wedding in January of 1947, right before Grandpa went with the Dutch Army to Indonesia on a peacekeeping mission. This way, Grandma received Army benefits while he was away. They wrote each other every day for 3 years. Because of the bombings in the Netherlands during World War II, my grandparents were number 500 on a list waiting for a place to live. In one letter, Grandpa jokingly suggested Grandma put their names on the list to be sponsored to Canada. She took it seriously and applied. Their church wedding took place 2 days after his return from Indonesia in February of 1950. In December of the same year, my aunt was born, and 6 weeks later, they embarked on the grueling journey by ship to Canada. They had been sponsored by a baker in Rosetown, Saskatchewan. My grandpa eventually owned a successful bakery in Provost, Alberta for the rest of his young life.
Dad came home in the summer of 1945 and began a new life, one full of hope and promise and many challenges. He married my mom and they started a family. He worked at farming, ran a grader for the municipality, and worked as a second man at a grain elevator in Manville. In 1956, he came east to Grand Center to open the first UGG grain elevator in town. While my dad rarely spoke of his war experiences, he was proud of his service and those that had served around him. He would attend Remembrance Day ceremonies and supported the local Legion and Wing Association. Dad passed away in 2009. Our family marks Remembrance Day every year after the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. We visit Dad's grave and pay honor to the man that gave so much, and to all those that have paid the ultimate price. If you are serving today, we thank you for your service and for our safety and for our freedom.
In Canada, Remembrance Day is a memorial day set aside to remember those members of the armed forces who have died in the line of duty and honor the men and women who have served and continue to serve Canada. For me, it just seems so very significant. Canadians freed my family. Canadians died for my family. And Canada wanted us. My grandparents were super proud to become Canadian. One of the things I love about living in Cold Lake is that I'm reminded every day of my freedom. Seeing my friends and neighbors who currently serve, seeing a veteran license plate, and hearing the jets. On November 11th, I remember.